Hi, everybody. Welcome back to La Vida Baseball Live. We are joined now by our special guest. He's the senior editor of Complex Sports, Adam Caparell. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
So, Adam, first of all, you're wearing a Yankees hat.
Yeah, I got my
miss
fitted
a
on
good
today.
Yankees hat, man.
I got to rep
miss
New
it,
York
right,
out here in LA.
I miss it. All right. So you wrote a very interesting article, which this goes into, if you guys have been following The Last Dance on ESPN, brilliant series. And you posed the question, I love this. Could Michael Jordan and the Bulls have been able to hack it and do what they did and did so well in the social media era? If social media was back then what it is today, would these guys have been able to perform at the height and to the level that they were? Please explain and break down where you got the idea for this and where this came from and sort of what your opinion is on the whole thing.
I will say that first and foremost, I don't think it's a completely original idea. I mean, if you've heard enough sports talk radio, I think some people have kind of casually brought up this topic, like, if the Bulls were inserted into this time frame of the last 5 years, and had to deal with what the Warriors had to deal with, how would they respond? But basically, the genesis of what we ended up doing was we had these conversations with people that covered the Bulls, Jordan's last run with the Bulls back in Chicago, and just asked them for their favorite stories about what it was like to cover Mike. And talking to people like Skip Bayless and Jackie McMullen and Mark Stein, these revered journalists who had unique stories about Mike, we just kind of casually posed the question, what if the Bulls were in today's world and how would it be different? Because as you guys can see from The Last Dance, I mean, the media hoopla and all the cameras and microphones and recorders shoved in their face on a daily basis was astronomical, even by today's standards, which is crazy to think about. So it's how would those guys in your estimation have responded? And everyone gave us kind of different answers. Skip, who's actually a friend of mine, had, and is a big time Michael Jordan fan, thought that MJ, with his incredible mental fortitude and his ability to kind of, put things to the side and overcome all distractions, would be just fine in today's social media world. But Mike obviously had a million different off the court stuff following him throughout the years, with the accusations of gambling and the fact that he was the most popular athlete, if not person in the world. And, his privacy, which he was able to maintain a little bit back then, with everyone having a camera phone and Twitter and Instagram, that would have been impossible to maintain. And, as the example I kind of posited in the piece that I wrote, it's when Mike went to the Atlantic City casinos in between, one of the games in the 93 Eastern Conference Finals, that story came out a day or two later in the New York Times. If he had done that in today's world, that would have hit Twitter in 10 seconds and would have been a massive distraction. And Phil Jackson and Scottie Pippen and Jerry Krause and all the guys in the organization would have had to answer, why is your superstar in a casino when you have a playoff game the next day? So, guys back then could have gotten away with a lot of things. Dennis Rodman obviously got away with going to Vegas on vacation in the middle of the season. That would never happen in today's world. And if Rodman was in the club one night in Hollywood or New York or Vegas or whatever, his antics would have been broadcast instantly on Instagram, IG. And again, Jordan and Pippen, who had to deal with a million different distractions and nonsense, would have been asked to comment about that. So, the people that we asked, and, we kept it kind of brief. We didn't ask everyone that we did for my original story, but, the people that I thought had really interesting, perspectives and had deep conversations with Mike and the Bulls back in the day, offered very different takes. But I think it would have been impossible not to be distracted and to be affected in some way, shape, or form by social media if the Bulls were put into today's world.
I think for sure that Dennis Rodman, for me, would have probably been the one most affected, because like you said, I mean, his lifestyle, we all knew about his lifestyle, but it was always a little bit delayed, right? And even things that we knew in time, I mean, him going to the MTV Movie Awards or Music Awards, and hanging out with Carmen Electra, and the lifestyle that he led, we would have all known about it instantaneously, and that would have probably led for him to be let go of the team.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. He would have put, every single hair change color would have been, broadcast on IG Live or whatever. And that would have been some sort of topic that would have been brought up. And listen, also, too, it's media availability was very different back then in the 90s than it is today when you go and cover NBA games. But still, it's the opportunities to get asked questions and to be bombarded with distractions and just to have your daily life be upended. We see it with LeBron. We see it with the other NBA superstars. You can't leave. You can't live a normal life the way you used to. And even though, again, Jordan was the most famous person, there was ways that he could get away. And he did leave the game. He did leave the game because both times, because he got fed up with the media and the distractions and just kind of wanted to be left alone. But that would have been entirely impossible unless you're an absolute hermit in today's world. So it's like, I think in some way, shape, or form, again, whether Robin, whether Pippen, whether Jordan, even Phil Jackson with his, eccentricities, I think in some way, shape, or form, if you had what we have today, those guys would have been, nicked and kind of thrown off course a little bit. And could they have responded to distractions and overcome them? Possibly. But I think it's completely improbable to say that the Bulls wouldn't have been affected in some major way, shape, and form in today's social media age.
Do you think that we would look back at the legacy and the mythology that is Michael Jordan? Do you think we would have been looking upon him differently? Would we have had social media back then? Would we remember him in his playing ways? I mean, I say remember him, he's still alive, but like, would we have remembered him as an icon any differently than we do now?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the mythology is helped by the fact that we didn't know quite as much, obviously, as, certainly what's being brought out in the documentary. Although if you're a Jordan stan, a lot of these stories, although we're getting some insights here and there to some of the kind of smaller things. But, the way, like, for instance, LeBron's life is kind of broadcast and the way he puts it out there for us to consume also. Yeah, I think his mythology and his status would have been changed. It's like when you don't allow the peek behind the curtains, obviously narratives are allowed to be put out there and to carried on, whether they're right or wrong. And, the whole accusation of, was Mike told to go away for 18 months because of the gambling issues by David Stern? Like, that was complete BS and nonsense. But there's other aspects of Mike's life that, we never got a chance to see, and he didn't want people to see and definitely didn't want to show. And I think because he wasn't as open and available as today's superstars are, that helped in the mythology of this great individual, this guy who was, high on this mountain and far away, and we don't know as much. I think you'd be foolish to not acknowledge that doesn't add to the mythology.
So as a whole, when you look at all sports players, all athletes across all sports, do you think those nuggets of humanitarianism, those nuggets that make them human, for better or for worse, when we, the public, the viewers, the fans, are privy to them, is it a plus or a minus on the whole for these guys?
I mean, I'd say as a media member, like, you obviously want as much insight and you certainly want as much access to these guys as possible. And that's become less and less and less over the years for a million reasons. That would be a completely different topic to talk about. In general, you want more. I mean, people want more to see more of their favorite people, and today's current environment allows for that. But I also think there's something to be said for not allowing people to see aspects, and again, to being reserved, and that I think allows for people to more highly revere you and to put you on different pedestals, whether that's a good or bad thing. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit more old school, and I don't mind people kind of stepping away from it and being less visible. Again, Jordan kind of really pulled back in the last his final run with the Bulls, just because he was, again, fed up with the BS. And went away because of all the BS. And if you inserted someone of that stature, like, I mean, Jordan was as popular as we think LeBron is today, or Steph Curry, or whatever other NBA superstar you want to put on his, close to that superstar status. Like, Jordan was infinitely, exponentially more popular and getting pulled in more directions. And I mean, he couldn't walk around anywhere without, cameras, old school paparazzi cameras following him. And we saw the trip to Europe about how it was insane, all the press that came out. So, to answer your question, as I go on the tangent right now, it's like, more access is good, more insight's good in theory, because it humanizes people better. But at the same time, like, I do kind of like that mythology aspect of stuff, and people being, more reserved and finding out stuff later on down the road.
Anna, my question is going to be, you got to talk to people that were in Chicago that were covering. How much did the media back then, I don't think they would do it now, protected not only Michael's private life, but also the other players? Did the media know what was going on and they just didn't write about it out of respect for the team and them? Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't, media 20 years ago wasn't what it was back in the 50s in baseball, or the 20s in baseball, where, Rodgers traveled with the team and they knew the bad antics and all, Babe Ruth running naked up and down a train car, like, that wouldn't get reported. Mickey Mantle's, nonsense, his drinking antics didn't get reported when the Rodgers were drinking with them and hanging out with them. media has been obviously separated from the athletes for a long, long time. And again, our access gets further and further cut down. I would say that, during Mike's time, there was obviously a rise in media outlets with more TV and more networks, more magazines, newspapers obviously thrived in ways they don't these days. So, there were different forms of media, but there was still a ton of attention that he would get, and a ton of people that would cover him on a daily basis that wouldn't otherwise cover basketball teams and athletic teams. So Mike was covered as extensively as anyone almost in today's age, just, very differently, but they didn't sweep under stuff. I mean, listen, he had friends in the media. We all know Ahmad Rashad was one of his best buds. And I'm sure Ahmad has a ton of dirt on Mike. And, it's like one of the things in The Last Dance he wanted to hear was like, would Ahmad spill some great stories? We haven't gotten that yet. Maybe we will get that, fingers crossed. But he had friends, different guys, different superstars have friends in the media, and some will be protected because if you give up those stories, you're going to get cut off from access. If you get cut off from access, then you can't ascend the ladder, and it's this game you have to play and blah, blah, blah. So I would say that for the most part in Mike's career, stuff wasn't necessarily killed. I mean, Mike didn't get into like massively terrible I think looking back, he didn't get involved in massively terrible like controversies. I mean, yeah, the gambling thing that came out, it was a bit of a black eye because Mike had this pristine, persona about him and this, air of invincibility. I mean, looking back on it now, he made a ton of money. Like he could cover golf gambling debts, and in his estimation, according to him, like, his golfing buddy who wrote a book about Mike's gambling debts wildly overestimated the money that he owed him because it sold books. So, again, a give and take. But I think, Mike's antics weren't swept under the rug. And because there was so much coverage, I don't think he really could, because at some point they would have come out. And again, example number one is in the 93 Eastern Conference Finals when he went down to Atlantic City. That made the papers the next day or the day after. They didn't kill that story because they were afraid of access to Mike. I mean, Mike was already restricting his access. And at that point, as tabloid journalism was thriving in the era of OJ and all that, stuff didn't get swept under the rug. Stuff was out in the open. Stuff was discussed. Stuff was written about. It was Mike who decided to cut back on the opportunities and the access because he was fed up of it, having to answer stuff that he felt wasn't worth his time.
Interesting.
Now, going back to Julie's question, Julie, one more question. Going back to what you talked about regarding social media and if it hurts or if it helps, I can't help but think about Alex Rodriguez and how while he played, he was infamous, right? At some point, people didn't like him, people hated him, and then now he's embraced social media. His image has changed completely, and people love him. They adore him.
Yeah, I mean, there's always redemption stories. Alex is one of the great ones. I think Alex has admitted that he was way too calculated and tried to be way too proper, and oftentimes put himself in the worst positions. And he's learned from that. And the one cool thing about Mike that, time obviously heals a lot of wounds. And the one thing we're seeing with Mike Jordan right now is that, the openness and the honesty that we were dying for all these years, he's finally opened up the vault a little bit and shown some vulnerability and shown emotion in ways that we've been dying for years. So listen, guys get older. I think we're all guilty of this. You get older, you mellow out, you stop caring about certain stuff, and you let certain things fly. And it's just like, it's not that big of a deal anymore. So it took us long enough to get it from Mike. We got it from Alex a little bit more. And Alex has been fun with how self-deprecating and honest he's been about the stupid mistakes he's made and the errors of his ways here and there. So I think eventually, if you're smart enough, you're savvy enough, and you have some wits about you, you do go that route. There's something wrong with you if you don't change your ways at some point.
Also, it's always easier to embrace the detractors when they're not criticizing your gameplay on the field and on the court. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be joined by Gemini Keys. Thank you so much, Adam Caporal, senior editor at Complex Sports. We appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, guys.